Okay, so this time you've given us some really rich material to work with.
Yeah, definitely.
Chapters 10 through 13 of Hebrews.
Yeah.
And it seems like you're really looking to get to the heart of it all,
Yeah. Yeah.
without getting too bogged down in the details, right?
Absolutely. I think our goal here is to really dive deep into these texts and pull out those key insights,
Yeah.
especially around this shift from the old way of relating to God to this new way.
Right.
And, the absolutely central role that faith plays in all of this.
Yeah.
We are dealing with religious texts here, so we'll be focusing on the theological perspectives that they offer.
Okay, so let's jump right into Hebrews chapter 10.
Okay.
This chapter really sets the stage by describing that previous system and hinting at why it wasn't really the final answer.
Right. And one of the things that's so fascinating to consider here is how the text describes the old system,
Yeah.
the law and those repeated animal sacrifices, as just a shadow of the good things that are coming,
Yeah.
rather than the real deal. It's like a blueprint versus the actual building.
Okay.
It really emphasizes that these ongoing sacrifices could never truly and completely cleanse people from sin.
Right. It paints this picture of a treadmill, doesn't it?
It does.
These offerings happening over and over again.
Hmm.
And there's that line about how year after year, there's a reminder of sins in those sacrifices.
Yeah.
It wasn't wiping the slate clean permanently.
Exactly. The writer's point is that if those sacrifices had truly dealt with sin once and for all, they wouldn't need to be repeated.
Right.
The very act of repetition was a constant acknowledgement that sin hadn't been fully taken care of.
Right.
And it states quite clearly, it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins.
Yeah.
It just wasn't designed to do that ultimate work.
So here's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
The arrival of Jesus is presented as this game-changing moment, fulfilling God's purpose in a totally new way.
It is.
And there's this powerful quote, "Sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but a body you prepared for me." What's the weight of that statement?
That's the heart of the shift right there.
Okay.
Instead of relying on these animal sacrifices, Jesus offers his own physical being.
Right.
And this is portrayed as the ultimate act of obedience to God's will,
Okay.
a completely different kind of offering.
Yeah.
It supersedes the old system.
Gotcha.
The text highlights that God wasn't ultimately pleased with those endless burnt offerings and sin offerings
Right.
prescribed by the law.
Right.
He had something else in mind.
And the impact of this new offering is described as once for all.
Yes.
A single event that
Yeah.
has this lasting power, right? Unlike the priests who had to stand there day after day repeating those same ultimately ineffective rituals.
That's a crucial contrast. Jesus, having offered one sacrifice for sins forever, then sat down at the right hand of God,
Okay.
a symbol of his work being completed and accepted.
Yeah.
As the text puts it, by one sacrifice, he's made perfect forever those who are being made holy.
Wow.
It's a done deal.
So what's the upshot of all of this for believers? It sounds like this one act of Jesus unlocks something really profound.
It does. Because of Jesus' sacrifice, his blood believers now have this confidence to enter the holy place,
Yeah.
which symbolizes God's presence without that old sense of fear and separation. This is described as a new and living way open for us through the curtain, which the text explicitly identifies as Jesus' body.
Right.
Think of it like a veil being torn open, giving direct access that wasn't there before.
Like the ultimate VIP pass has just been granted.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And with this forgiveness of sins secured, the text declares that there is no longer any sacrifice for sin.
Right.
The need for those constant repetitions is gone.
Wow.
Believers have had their hearts sprinkled clean and their bodies washed with pure water, signifying a complete cleansing.
But then there's this really stark warning that follows, isn't there?
Yeah.
About the serious consequences of deliberately sinning after understanding this truth.
Yes, the text takes a very firm stance here. It says if we deliberately keep on sinning after we have received the knowledge of the truth, no sacrifice for sins is left.
So there's nothing else that can be done.
The implication is that rejecting this ultimate sacrifice leaves no other way to find forgiveness.
Right.
And it leads to a fearful expectation of judgment.
It even draws a parallel to the old law, where disobeying Moses' law could lead to death based on witness testimony.
Right.
And then it asks this powerful question.
Yeah.
Wouldn't rejecting the Son of God and treating his sacrifice as something common deserve an even much worse punishment?
The logic is quite direct. Having been given a far greater revelation and a far more significant sacrifice, turning away from it carries correspondingly graver consequences.
Yeah.
The text reminds the listener of God's warnings about judgment and the terrifying prospect of falling into the hands of a living God.
Now, towards the end of chapter 10, the tone shifts a bit,
Okay.
acknowledging the hardships that the original listeners had already gone through.
Yes.
It mentions a past great contest in the face of suffering. What was the context there?
It appears that the initial recipients of this letter had faced considerable persecution because of their faith.
Really?
The text speaks of them being publicly exposed to insult and persecution
Oh.
and showing solidarity with others who were suffering similarly.
Okay.
They endured the loss of their possessions, yet they held on to their hope and faith,
Wow.
recognizing that they had better and lasting possessions.
So they still had something to look forward to.
Yeah, it's a reminder that embracing this new way wasn't always easy for them.
Yeah, it really puts things in perspective, doesn't it?
It does.
Faith wasn't just an intellectual agreement. It had real-world consequences for these early believers.
Mm-hmm.
And this leads us right into chapter 11, which is famously all about the nature and examples of faith.
Exactly. Chapter 11 opens with that foundational definition. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see.
Okay.
It establishes faith as the very bedrock of how we understand and relate to God.
By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command,
Yeah.
so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible.
Yes.
That's a profound statement about the role of faith in understanding creation itself.
It is.
It's saying that faith gives us insight beyond what we can physically observe.
It suggests that faith provides a lens through which we can understand the origins of the physical world.
I see.
Then the chapter unfolds this incredible list of figures from the Old Testament,
Right.
each one highlighted for their acts of faith.
Yeah.
It's like a historical record of faith in action.
It really is like a hall of fame of faith.
Totally.
And we start with Abel, whose sacrifice was better than Cain's because of his faith.
Yes.
What made his offering stand out?
What's insightful here is that Abel's faith gave his offering greater value in God's eyes.
Okay.
The text says he was commended as righteous.
Mm-hmm.
And even though he died through it, he still speaks.
Wow.
His act of faith continues to be an example.
Then we have Enoch, who was taken up to heaven because he pleased God. And the text makes it clear, without faith, it is impossible to please God.
That's a core principle being established there.
Yeah.
Faith isn't just a nice add-on. It's essential for a genuine relationship with God.
Right.
Then we see Noah, who built the ark in obedience to God's warning about something he couldn't yet see,
Mm-hmm.
a future flood.
Right.
His faith acted on God's word.
And then Abraham, who is such a central figure,
Absolutely.
his willingness to leave his home and go to land he didn't know, trusting in God's promise of countless descendants through Sarah, even when it seemed biologically impossible.
Abraham's journey is a prime example of living by faith in the face of uncertainty.
It really is.
He lived as a foreigner in the Promised Land,
Right.
looking forward to the city with foundations whose architect and builder is God, a heavenly dwelling.
Okay.
The text emphasizes that these individuals recognize their earthly lives as temporary,
Right.
longing for a better country, a heavenly one.
It's interesting how it reframes their perspective.
Yeah.
This earthly existence seen as transient in light of a greater eternal reality that they grasped by faith.
Absolutely. And Abraham's willingness to offer Isaac.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
That's a really challenging illustration of his unwavering trust, believing God could even raise him from the dead.
It's a truly profound demonstration of faith.
It is pushing the boundaries of human understanding.
Right.
The chapter continues with examples like Isaac blessing his sons Jacob and Esau.
Okay.
Regarding things to come, Jacob blessing Joseph's sons and worshiping God as he leaned on his staff,
Right.
and Joseph's own faith in predicting the Exodus and giving instructions about his bones.
Right.
All these actions stemmed from their belief in God's promises for the future.
And we also have Moses, whose parents weren't afraid of the king's edict and hid him.
Yes.
And Moses himself, choosing to identify with his oppressed people rather than enjoying the privileges of Egyptian royalty, valuing the disgrace for the sake of Christ as greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt.
Yeah.
It's a powerful statement about his priorities.
It highlights a faith that looked beyond immediate comfort and recognized a greater future reward.
I see.
Moses' leadership of the Exodus, his observance of the Passover, and the crossing of the Red Sea are all presented as acts of faith in God's power and his promises to deliver his people.
And then we get into the more dramatic accounts like the walls of Jericho falling down by faith after circling them,
Yes.
and Rahab the prostitute being saved because she welcomed the spies.
That's right.
It shows that faith wasn't limited to the traditionally pious.
Exactly. Rahab, someone from outside the Israelite community, is commended for her faith demonstrated through her actions.
Okay.
The chapter then briefly mentions a whole host of other figures.
Right.
Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets,
Mm-hmm.
who through faith accomplished incredible feats and endured immense hardships.
It's quite an extensive list.
It is.
Overcoming kingdoms, administering justice, obtaining promises, shutting the mouths of lions, quenching raging fire, escaping the edge of the sword, becoming strong when they were weak. It's a powerful testament to what faith can achieve in diverse circumstances.
Absolutely.
And then also those who face torture, imprisonment, and even death for their faith.
What's really significant is the concluding point of this chapter.
Okay.
It states that these were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised.
So they had faith, but didn't receive the promise.
Meaning the full realization of God's ultimate plan.
Right.
This sets the stage for the idea that God had something even better planned for the believers in the present.
Okay.
A shared completion that wasn't fully experienced in the Old Testament era.
So leading us right into chapter 12.
Yes.
Which seems to build on this idea of perseverance.
Yeah.
And introduces the concept of God's discipline
Right.
within this new covenant context.
Yes. Chapter 12 opens by urging the listener to throw off everything that hinders them and to run with perseverance the race marked out for them, fixing their eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith, who himself endured the cross.
It's a powerful call to keep going.
It is.
Using Jesus as the ultimate example of faithful endurance through suffering.
Yes. And then there's this direct instruction not to grow weary.
Right.
And to remember that God's discipline is actually a sign of his loving fatherly care.
Right.
That quote really hits home. My son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline.
The text reframes discipline not as arbitrary punishment, but as a form of loving correction and training,
It does.
much like a parent guiding a child.
Right.
And the ultimate aim of this discipline is to produce a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it.
Exactly.
It's about growth and refinement.
Yes.
So these challenges we face aren't meant to destroy us, but to shape us.
That's right.
The chapter then encourages the listener to strengthen their weak hands and knees and to strive for peace with everyone and for holiness.
Yeah.
And there's a stark warning against falling short of God's grace and the danger of bitterness, using Esau as a negative example.
Esau, who foolishly traded his birthright for a single meal, serves as a cautionary tale against taking spiritual blessings lightly
Right.
for immediate temporary gratification.
Gotcha. Then the text draws this incredible contrast between the experience of Mount Sinai and the access that believers now have through the new covenant.
It does.
That description of Mount Sinai is really dramatic.
It is.
The blazing fire, the darkness, the storm, the blast of a trumpet, the terrifying voice of God.
Right.
It sounds utterly overwhelming and inaccessible.
It was deliberately portrayed that way to inspire awe and reverence,
Okay.
highlighting the separation between a holy God and sinful humanity under the Old Covenant.
Right.
But now believers have drawn near to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, a far more intimate and glorious reality.
And Jesus is presented as the mediator of this new covenant.
Yes.
And his blood speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. What's the significance of that comparison?
Abel's blood shed unjustly cried out for vengeance.
Okay.
Jesus' blood, also shed unjustly, but as a sacrifice for sin, speaks of forgiveness, reconciliation, and the establishment of a new and better relationship with God.
Right.
It's a message of grace and redemption, overcoming the cycle of violence and retribution.
The chapter concludes with a strong warning to pay attention to God's voice.
Yes.
Emphasizing that if those who rejected him on earth didn't escape,
Right.
how much less will those who reject him from heaven?
Right.
And the image of the shaking of the heavens and the earth signifies the removal of the temporary and the permanence of God's kingdom.
Yes.
And then there's the call to worship with reverence and awe, because our God is a consuming fire, a powerful reminder of his holiness and power.
It underscores the importance of a deep respect and proper understanding of God's nature within this new context of grace.
Right. Finally, we arrive at chapter 13,
Okay.
which shifts gears into very practical instructions for daily living.
Yeah, this chapter feels very grounded, focusing on how believers should interact with each other and the world around them.
It does.
It starts with urging them to keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters,
Okay.
and to not forget to show hospitality to strangers,
Right.
even suggesting they might unknowingly entertain angels.
It emphasizes that faith should translate into tangible actions within the community.
It does.
This includes showing empathy for those in prison and those who are mistreated,
Yes.
honoring marriage, and keeping their lives free from the love of money, trusting in God's promise.
Right.
Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you.
That promise. Never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you.
Yeah,
Feels like such a solid anchor amidst all these practical guidelines.
it really does. The chapter also reminds them to remember their leaders and imitate their faith, and it affirms the unchanging nature of Jesus Christ.
Yes.
That must have been a source of stability for them,
It provided a sense of continuity and reassurance in a changing world.
right? It then cautions against being led astray
Right.
by strange teachings, particularly those focused on external rituals like dietary laws,
Yeah.
rather than the core message of grace.
Right.
And there's that interesting symbolism of the altar, where only those who serve at the tabernacle can eat from.
Right.
But the bodies of the animals whose blood is brought into the most holy place are burned outside the camp.
Yeah.
It then connects this to Jesus' suffering outside the city gate.
Yeah.
What's the takeaway there for believers?
The idea is that just as Jesus was rejected and crucified outside the city, believers should be willing to go outside the accepted norms
Okay.
and identify with his suffering and rejection, recognizing that their true and lasting home is in the heavenly city.
And the practical advice continues to continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise and to not forget to do good and to share with others, because these are the kinds of sacrifices that please God in this new covenant.
Right.
There's also the instruction to obey their leaders and the request for prayers.
Yes.
It's all very down to earth.
These are presented as the natural outworkings of a life transformed by faith.
Right. The request for prayers underscores the importance of mutual support and accountability within the community.
Absolutely.
The author expresses confidence in their good conscience and their desire to live honorably in every way.
Yeah.
The chapter wraps up with a mention of Timothy being released from prison and the hope of seeing them soon, followed by final greetings and a benediction of grace. Be with them all through Jesus Christ.
Yes.
It ends on a note of connection and blessing.
It brings the focus back to the personal relationships and the ongoing life of the community, reinforcing the themes of grace and peace that run throughout the letter.
So as we conclude this deep dive into Hebrews 10 through 13,
Okay.
we've really seen this incredible transformation laid out, haven't we?
Yeah.
Moving from a system of repeated sacrifices that could never fully deal with sin to the singular perfect sacrifice of Jesus that achieves complete forgiveness.
Yes.
And the emphasis shifts from these external rules and rituals to an internal transformation fueled by faith.
Precisely. The core message is this new and living way that Jesus opened up,
Right.
providing direct access to God and a complete cleansing from sin.
Yeah.
The examples of faith in chapter 11 serve as powerful illustrations of what it means to live in light of this new reality, a deep, unwavering trust that shapes our actions and our perspective on life.
And this faith isn't meant to be passive.
Yeah.
It's actively demonstrated through perseverance in the face of difficulties.
Right.
A willingness to learn and grow through God's discipline and by showing tangible love and doing good within our communities.
Absolutely.
You know, that stark contrast between the terrifying scene at Mount Sinai and the glorious access we now have to Mount Zion really highlights the profound change brought about by this new covenant.
It does.
It's a completely different way of relating to God.
What's truly compelling is how this letter bridges these grand theological truths with the everyday lives of believers, urging them to live consistently with this new reality they've embraced. The practical instructions in chapter 13 aren't just tacked on. They flow directly from the foundational truths established in the preceding chapters.
I see.
It's about living out the implications of this incredible shift.
So as you consider this new and living way, take some time to reflect on what it truly means for you to live by faith. How does this understanding of a once-for-all sacrifice and the direct access it provides reshape how you view your own challenges and your relationship with the divine?
That's a great question.
It's a question that hopefully will stay with you long after our deep dive today.